Yeah, we get it. Welcome back, everyone, to part 8 of the world building review of the Avatar: The Last Airbender franchise. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty big subject about this world. So stick with me as we talk about a few more things because they're going to be important for the context of what we're going to talk about here today. And of course, as usual, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that you can help us keep on developing, let's say. And don't forget, in the description below, you'll still find the links to the official Discord server as well as the official Instagram page of this channel so that you can keep up with more updates and have further discussions with me on really fun world building topics. Anyway, enough chit chat, let's get to the video, starting with Sozen's Comet. Alright, this is an important one. Sozen's Comet is, well, a comet that passes once every 100 years, and its presence is enough to juice up all the firebenders for a brief period of time, enough that Fire Lord Sozen, the one who named the damn thing, used it as an opportunity to wipe out the entire air nomad civilization so that the next avatar, who was destined to be born among them, would never rise to power enough to stop them, and without the avatar, the Fire Nation could officially conquer the world. So, while one might think that this could be a stupid idea because if you just kill one avatar, they're just going to be reborn into the next nation in the cycle, in this case the Water Tribes, this idea actually does have some merit to it, because, as I mentioned in a previous video, they'd be ensuring that even if the cycle continued, it would loop back and end with the last avatar being a firebender again. And if they indoctrinate him or her enough, boom, that avatar will be able to fight only for the Fire Nation and everyone else will be doomed.
Comrades, I give you
the Avatar.
You are a symbol for all we aspire to be.
As far as warfare goes, it's kind of like the ultimate investment. So, tragic as it is, it does make some sense. But I do have one big important question. How the hell did this never happen before? Remember, this is a world that has continued on for 10,000 damn years like this. And the comet passes by every 100. I'm not a math guy, but doesn't that mean that this comet would have passed by like at least 100 times in this world's entire history? And I'd imagine that at least a quarter of these times would have been exactly when the next avatar would have been born an airbender. How the hell did the Fire Nation never think to take advantage of this before? Why did this happen only now with Aang? Yeah, honestly, this really doesn't work, so it would need to be tweaked. And honestly, I think the solution is a lot simpler than one might think. If the comet passes by every 100 years, and the entire damn world would have been very well aware that the Fire Nation would be cooking something up, they would have put a lot of effort to keep the Fire Nation in check during those times. I mean, look at the damn thing! It was lighting up the damn sky when Aang was fighting Ozai. How could the people of this world not know it was coming if it was on a regular basis? So instead, in order to avoid having to worry about that, we can say that the reason Sozen was able to do the unthinkable of killing all the air nomads now thanks to the comet is because this comet should have been passing closer and closer to this world each passing century. This way, for all those 10 millennia, no one would have noticed anything because it was just too far away. And perhaps it was in the past 100 or 2 years before Sozen that firebenders would start to notice it in the sky and realize that it was powering their firebending a little bit more. Something they could have also pondered for a long time in secret without the other nations knowing. They would know that the next time it would have been close enough to really give them a boost. And Sozen would have taken advantage of it, wiping out the air nomads because he figured that now was as good of a time as ever. An opportunity that just wouldn't have been available before. And yes, this means that by the time it arrived again when Aang had to fight off Ozai, it would have been even closer and made the firebenders even more powerful. Which checks out, because before they were strong enough to wipe out the air nomads, sure. But then look at them after! Ozai was able to blast entire forests of the Earth Kingdom single-handedly. Sure, he's particularly gifted, fine, but come on. These dudes could have easily burned the entire world now if they wanted to, if it hadn't been for Aang and the others. So yeah, this means that the comet would have been much closer, and it would have had a trajectory of coming closer and closer each time. Enough that before it was still a mystery because it would have been way too high in the sky to notice properly. Aang only found out because Roku told him after all, and the next time it was close enough that it turned the sky pretty much full red. And yeah, this does mean that we should see it eventually return again during The Legend of Korra. Her series is about 60 years, give or take, after the last time it passed, so by the time she's like, I don't know, 40 or something, she, the Avatar, would have to face it off again. And if you think it means the Fire Nation could decide to go gun-ho and try another invasion, think again. Remember, in this case, the comet would be coming closer and closer to this world, meaning that next time, the Firebenders wouldn't just be more powerful, but it could be so strong that it would go out of control even for them. After all, as John said,
fire is alive. It breathes. It grows. Without the bender, a rock will not throw itself, but fire will spread and destroy everything in its path if one does not have the will to control it.
So it would be very much in theme with their entire philosophy. Think about it, this is the opportunity to have an entire, I don't know, standalone comic or movie or whatever it is about Korra in her 40s or something, now a seasoned adult, and her mission would be to stop or destroy the comet entirely somehow, because if she doesn't, it means that the Firebenders this time could be a danger for themselves.
Flame on! Whoa! I'm on fire! Not working! Get the fire extinguisher! Oh no! God, you idiots!
And frankly, considering how close it was to this world last time, it might very well slam into the whole planet and cause a global extinction if no one does anything about it. So yeah, while this is something that needs to be addressed, I think that this solution could be a good storytelling opportunity for the creators to use in the future. And lo and behold, just as I was finishing the editing of this video, I found out that apparently there were major reported leaks for the upcoming animated series of Avatar Studios, set decades after The Legend of Korra during the next earthbending Avatar in the cycle. And if these leaks are in any way true, among them is the information that something major and cataclysmic will happen that will reshape the entire world, and it will apparently all be caused by none other than Korra herself. Very interesting. Now, speaking of Korra, there's a really big topic we should talk about now, and will open the door to a much broader discussion. So, let's talk about technological progress. That's right, one of the biggest issues I have with this whole franchise. How is it that these four nations have gone for over
10,000 years
living in what is frankly a feudal level of technology and progress, with nothing changing ever, and then all of a sudden, after Aang stopped the war, we went from zero to hero, and there's this sudden enormous boom of technological progress during The Legend of Korra. And I mean it, it's not slow at all. Cause even during the Korra series alone, we go from a 1920s New York type city to having giant freaking mechs in the span of a few damn years. And the real kicker here is that, again, these people have freaking bending. This isn't like our world where at least we really had to earn our way to where we are now, because we had to go through several millennia of slowly creating the right tools to develop ourselves more and more, because it was all we had. In this world, these suckers could have built any building, any irrigation system, grow as much food as they wanted, hunt as much food as they wanted with ease, already have controlled electricity, and do just so much more with just a few moves. They should have reached a Jetson-level civilization after the first few hundred years in which they got bending. And yet they were stuck for over 10 millennia like this, and only now they wake up to the possibilities? Yeah, no. I never bought that and I still don't buy it. And also because the reason why The Legend of Korra is set in this 1920s setting aesthetic is just because one of the creators happened to like the Prohibition era aesthetic. Okay? And look, I get it, but if you have to do that, at least back it up with some logic. Because as of right now, it doesn't make sense. So, either we have to say that the entire Korra series is null, which would be throwing out a lot of material, or we're going to have to do a fair bit of retooling in order to justify this. First things first, even if there was a fair bit of stagnation for thousands of years in this world, I still think that there should have been at least some level of technological progress, even if very slowly. Maybe during Avatar 1's era, they shouldn't have had whole buildings on the lion turtles already, but instead they should have started in like a quasi-Bronze Age level of civilization or less. Where at most they can have like straw and mud huts on them, as we admittedly at least see with the original Airbenders, or they should have lived in caves on top of the lion turtles. Although, granted, it's not that impossible in fantasy to have some stasis or stagnation. For example, I highly recommend this video on medieval stasis by the YouTuber Perseus Grimm, which is actually really well done. Plus, let's face it, as other YouTubers have also pointed out, if you have buildings on the lion turtles, even the smallest movements from them will cause huge earthquakes that would damage these buildings. So yeah, no royalty, no hierarchies like the Qin families, just kind of more brutal tribes at most. I'm not saying they should be specifically just cavemen, but you get the idea. Second, in fairness, I should point out some of the elements of our real world as well. Cause see, while we in our real world did achieve a lot during the Industrial Revolution, that doesn't mean that all the nations of the world were the same, and depended greatly on their type of landmass and isolation. Because, for example, during the Industrial Revolution, in Japan, they still kind of remained in a type of feudal type of civilization for a much longer time than the Europeans did, because being on an island, they didn't feel as much of a need to develop technologically until invasions started to arrive. Ditto and, unfortunately worse in the end, for the Native Americans, who had such vast plains and territories that it was harder geographically to reach that many other tribes and cause wars over territories. They were kind of at peace for a really long time, all things considered, because it would have taken them a long time to reach each other to cause issues in the first place. Until, yes, the Europeans arrived and, well, we sadly know what happened there. And just FYI, if I missed something about their history here, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I'm willing to admit if I got something wrong or if I might have missed some details. Places like Europe, on the other hand, spent millennia with dozens of different kinds of civilizations all cramped together in tighter territories, so they went to war more often, and as we unfortunately know, war breeds necessity, which breeds innovation, which breeds technological progress. So, okay, I wanted to point this out because, yes, it is possible and fair that certain civilizations might not be able to develop technologically. And let's not forget, the world of the four nations in Avatar was specifically kept at peace for millennia because it was always the Avatar, him or herself, that enforced that peace. They couldn't do anything about it even if they wanted to. Okay, so maybe there's a leg that they could stand on when it comes to this topic, but I don't know, guys. These are still civilizations that have literal magical—
It's not magic, it's water.
Yeah, whatever, but it's still damn powers and lots of them still have it. I honestly really don't think that we can equate our real world to this. This one element, bending, changes the entire damn equation. So, what can we use to fix this? What caused everyone to remain quote-unquote technologically balanced all this time? Well, I think the answer is actually right in front of us. Balance. Remember, this is a world where bending is real, but also a world where freaking spirits and the entire concept of spiritual energy is way more real than in our world. So much so that you can almost cut it with a knife. So, we could say that since there have been so many spirits around, regardless if they're in the physical or spiritual realm, their presence alone could have been enough to create a permeating sense of balance within every human across the entire world. Despite having this great advantage that is bending, all the civilizations would have developed a much greater inner balance to the point that it might have become physical in their bodies for all I know, and this, plus the threat of the Avatar by merely this, was the thing that would have kept all the nations in a state where they just wouldn't have felt the need to develop technologically, or if they really did, it would have been at a really slow snail's pace. It would have almost forced them to be like this. Although it wouldn't have been a perfect solution, of course, as we do see every now and then that there have been some very slight technological progresses here and there. But if you think about it, they were not based on technological development, but in finding new ways to develop their bending and their spiritualism with newer and newer techniques. That would have been what their development was focused on. We assume that technology would have been the thing they would have developed on, but that's only because that's our perspective. But in a world where bending exists, we might have never realized that that was their priority. And hell, for good measure, I think this translates to the speed in which new bending techniques can become unlocked. Because if you think about it, something like metal bending wasn't a real thing until Toph invented it because
I am the greatest earthbender in the world.
Yeah, that. And yet, while we could have said that she's a rare case because she's uniquely talented, in Korra, many more people can suddenly use it with relative ease, so much so they built a freaking city of metal. But how is this possible when before it was never even considered? How come we see plenty of techniques like lava bending or blood bending or whatever become much more prevalent the moment any one individual achieves this? It's almost like one person unlocks it for everyone. Well, in this case, maybe we could simply say that since, like I said, bending could just be an extension of one's own spirit, these new techniques count as a quote-unquote technological progress of sorts too. Except they're not outward developments, but inner ones. And perhaps, since this is all tied to spirits and spiritual energy, once one person unlocks it, said new technique reverberates towards all the benders of that same element.
I figured it out. Skadoosh.
So that at least the potential of it can be achieved easily enough as soon as you know that original technique. It's almost like saying the difference between unlocking a door or knowing that there was a door to unlock in the first place. And again, it was something that happened very rarely before, but it's now much more common because everything is progressing all together at a rapid pace. But when the potential incline happens, it just skyrockets immediately. And all of this wouldn't have happened at all if it wasn't for none other than Sozen's comet. Yes, since we said that the comet would have been an approaching thing instead of just a reoccurring thing, we could say that this was exactly the thing that threw the entire world off balance in the first place. Enough to sort of allow the inner flames of all the Fire Nation to suddenly go askew, unbalancing them, and they would have felt the need for the very first time in this world's history to seize and conquer as soon as they knew the comet would soon return. And if their inner fire wasn't keeping them in balance anymore, they would have shifted their focus to technology instead exclusively as soon as they knew that the Avatar would have been gone. But this is only half of the equation as to why I think this world had almost no technological progress and then suddenly had it all at once. And, believe it or not, I propose that the other half of the equation would have been thanks to none other than Aang. So now, let's finish this video by talking about the iceberg. We all know that Aang ran away from his home to avoid the responsibilities of being the Avatar. Something I don't think the Netflix show should have tampered with, but whatever. And was caught in a storm that triggered his avatar state and forced him to trap him and Appa in an iceberg, remaining frozen there for 100 years underwater until Katara and Sokka broke him out. Alright, cool. But I do have some issues with this. If someone is frozen in ice, that doesn't mean that they're just stuck there until someone sets them free. Realistically, they just die. But I already know what you're thinking. It's heavily implied that what allowed him to survive in there all along is the fact that he entered the Avatar state, which is what kept his body alive in this icy prison. Sort of like how Captain America was able to survive being frozen because it was the super soldier serum that allowed this. So, okay, Aang's body could survive the ice, which is fair. But then, how did Appa survive it? He has no Avatar state to speak of, and what surrounded him was still ice, so his body shouldn't have made the trip. No, we need something better to explain this. And, ironically, the show was this close to doing exactly that. In the official art book of the show, I found out that the creators originally wanted Aang to not just be frozen in ice, but to be in a sphere of constant spiritual energy fueled by the Avatar state. No ice required. But they chose against this only because they thought it would have been too hard and complicated to animate, so they simplified their job by saying it was just ice. Man, I get it, but that would have been perfect. So, yeah, I'm just gonna roll with it. I think that all along it should have been a sphere of constant spiritual energy, which was so expansive that it was enough to encompass Appa and keep him alive as well. So, yeah, that's way better and should have been the case all along. Problem solved, right? It would have been, if it wasn't for the fact that I think it still has one more issue. Can the Avatar state really keep both Aang and Appa alive so well that they didn't even age, and for a whole damn century? The Avatar state is something that all the Avatars have to be really careful of, because if they get killed during it, the entire cycle will be broken. And even then, they can't keep it up for more than a few minutes at a time, much less a whole century. It would have drained him. So how could have Aang kept this whole thing going for so long? Well, bear with me for a moment, because this is my proposition. If you think about it, as far as we all know so far, all of the Avatars have managed to live a full, longish life. The youngest recorded one to ever die was Avatar Kuruk, who died at the age of 30, meaning that every single one of them succeeded in learning all of the elements. So, what would happen if one of them were to die before learning to master them all? Well, perhaps we can say that, since the power of the elements was gifted by the lion turtles to the first Avatar, 1, then that means that all the extra elements of all the Avatars were sort of borrowed. Or at least, it was the same element that was originally given to 1, and perhaps it was those elements that are transcended to each Avatar in the cycle. The only element that is truly their own is just the one of the nation they're born in, such as air for Aang for example, which is why all the other elements have to slowly and gradually be unlocked. I think that all the others are actually the original piece of element that 1 was given, which maybe we can say was split a very long time ago and given to the very first Sun Warriors, which is why they apparently have what's called the quote-unquote first flame that's still burning after millennia. It wouldn't be the actual first flame, just the first one that was given to the first Avatar, and the mythology might have gotten things mixed up a little. So, since we can't say that it's Rava carrying those elemental powers with her through each incarnation, perhaps we can say that if an Avatar dies before mastering the other elements, before bringing them to the surface, let's say, then each one of said elements would be lost forever for all future Avatars, in the same way that the entire cycle can end if they're killed during the Avatar state. So, with this in mind, we have Aang that nearly drowned, and the Avatar state activated to keep him alive. The problem with that though is that he was still underwater, in the middle of a storm that wouldn't have ended so soon, and aside from the state activating on its own, he was also unconscious. So perhaps we can say that Rava inside of him knew that if she stopped the flow of the Avatar state for any reason, then there would have been way too many other factors that could have killed Aang, and if he died off so soon before mastering the other elements, then there could have been the risk that all the future Avatars would have lost the elemental ability needed to be the bringer of peace in the world. So, in this proposition of mine, Rava might have been forced to do the unthinkable. Since the Avatar state can only go for so long, she might have set it up to absorb all the other surrounding spiritual energies around Aang. All of this just to keep him alive. The problem though was that he still ended up in a sort of iceberg, regardless if it was swirling with spiritual energy inside or not, and he remained underwater. And the only people who could have known where he went were the air nomads, whom soon after were wiped out anyway. Also, Bumi would have been way too young and far away to help anyway. Thus, the knowledge of Aang was completely lost, and no one would have come to the rescue. And yet, Rava would have still needed to keep all of this up to keep Aang alive. And so, this fear would have kept draining more and more spiritual energy. And if it really went for 100 years, I think it would have caused a side effect to the entire world, where the balance that all the humans of all the nations had would have very slowly trickled away, like a water-filled bucket that now had a hole in it. And after a century, even after Aang returned and helped defeat the Fire Nation once and for all of the humans in this world would have still had a huge chunk of that inner balance of themselves slowly drained away even through each generation. Enough that, even after the war ended, there would have been a strong hunger and desire to move on. To not be satisfied or at peace with the world as it is anymore, but to instead innovate and help create a whole new series of technological advancements. The new thing that they craved for when elemental inner balance could no longer satisfy that need. Thus, I think that this is why this world would have managed to remain almost in the same technological state for 10,000 years, despite having such clear powers, and yet only now decide to take advantage of it. It would have been because of these two massive elements that would have screwed over everything. The comet throwing an entire nation off balance, and Aang accidentally functioning as a global sinkhole for the rest of the nation's spiritual balance just to remain alive. Which, yes, means that Aang would have had a lot more pressure on him than we saw in the show if he had been aware of this. Even if, to be clear, I'm not blaming him at all. He was only a kid. How could a damn kid know that any of this could have happened after all? And if nothing else, he still more than proved himself by deciding to take on the responsibility of what happened and do his very best to make up for his accidental mistakes. Hell, I argue that his actions would have been even more honorable with this notion, proving even more how I think he might have been so far the very best Avatar who ever lived. And there's the possibility that all of this might have brought forth something brand new to the entire world that no one could have ever expected. But if you want to find out what, you'll have to join me next time at the final part on this series of the world-building review of the Avatar: The Last Airbender franchise. Come on guys, we're nearly there. So, stay tuned, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Join my Patreon if you want to support what I do here. In the description below, you'll also find the links to the official Discord server, as well as the official Instagram page of this channel if you want to keep up with more updates. And I'll see you all in the final stretch. Until the next and final time, keep building worlds.